Howdy folks, Brian Cusco here at Triple B. Today we've got the second to last Herpeton talk for you. It's Mr. Robert Fisher with USGS telling you some it's 45 minutes or so, but it's such dense information in this video. I hope that you guys stick around. I'd like to give a thank you to all you folks that have been watching all these Herpeton talks and listening to them because they're so full of information. I appreciate you guys out there that are willing to take the time to listen to this stuff, because if you really care about herpetology and herpetoculture, in my opinion, you've been paying attention to these videos and not just passing them by and listening to what the folks in them have to say, because it's important, very important to what we do as a whole in this entire hobby. So I really appreciate you guys, and I just want to take a moment to thank you for that. And you're watching Triple B TV.
Because you have. I actually had to ask to come here. Like, a lot of you guys got invited, but I wrote this diatribe. Philippe, can I please come and talk about social responsibilities? I don't know. I got to talk to Alan. And anyway, they let me come. And I appreciate that these guys have done a great job here, both Alan and Philippe. And I appreciate Philippe flipping with me right now this morning to switching talks, because I had to actually black out some stuff on some of my slides because we're videotaping it, and you'll hear about that in a minute. So I'd spend a little bit of time doing that. Anyway, I'm going to talk about social responsibility because part of what we're doing is visioning out, and so kind of some of the things I think about that are social responsibility tied to this kind of this trade. I'm Robert Fisher. There's my email address. If you email me and you don't hear back, then just email me again and again and again and again. And at some point, it'll show up at the top, and I'll hit it. It's not because I'm ignoring you. So that's a little bit of my background. When I was working for Gary, when I just turned 15, he was like, nobody needs school. School's overrated. You don't have to do any of that stuff. And now he's mad because I'm going to Fiji catching iguanas, and he's not. So school might be overrated, but I'm going to Fiji to catch iguanas, and you're not. Yeah. So anyway, I've known Gary since '82 is when I first started working with Gary, opening up all kids. It was a long time. We could write books. This guy, I could write books about that guy. Anyway, I work for USGS. I've been there since '98. It's the science agency within the Department of Interior. I just want to be clear, we're non-regulatory and we're non-land management. And our mandate is on every slide, science for a changing world. So if you have issues with CITES or Fish and Wildlife Service or any of that stuff, trust me, I have the same regulations everybody else has. I have a 5-year CITES permit for bringing in iguanas, and it's a pain in the butt. It's posted on Federal Register just like everybody else, and this is just for bringing in tiny, tiny bits of tissue. I can sympathize with you, but I can't fix your problem. Just wanted to be clear about that. So I'm a scientist, not a regulator. But I do work for the federal government, and all of you guys are aware of who my boss is, I'm sure. And then there's a recent lab photo. So I just wanted to acknowledge I have a huge group of people. I learned a lot of my management skills from Gary, and it just seems like I've acquired a lot of tasks over time. So we have geneticists, modelers, spatial modelers, all kinds of field people, and we do a ton of work. I just want to step back and give you a little bit more of my background. You heard a little bit from Gary, but I actually, when we saw Maddie yesterday talk about kind of being the next generation of herpetoculturists, I actually was that generation as well. This is a cover of the 1967, the aquarium. That's my dad's photo on the front of discus fish that he was breeding in our house. And so I was about 6 months old when this came out in January, but that was from the competition kind of earlier in the year. And so when I grew up, we had sea turtles in the house because it was still legal to have sea turtles. We'd raise them, then we were in Chicago, we gave the first ones to the Shed Aquarium, and then when we moved to California, we used to give them to SeaWorld. My dad owned a pet store in Chicago, then he owned a pet store in Orange County. And so I grew up in the pet store, in the pet trade. Gary used to go to my dad's pet store because he used to import, at Pisces World, he would import Red Sea marine fishes and a lot of stuff. Yeah, and so I kind of grew up in that world, and like Rapashi, we made food, and so in our house we made food for decades. We made this fish food. That's a chocolate milk machine, and we'd take sea urchin gonads, cook it in the chocolate milk machine. Our house, my parents' house would just smell like bleach because we have to bleach all these bottles. And so we made food for a couple of decades until sushi became really popular. And all the uni, we would all be like the D-grade uni that couldn't go to Japan would be the stuff my dad cooked up. And so I'm really familiar with the trade since forever. And then through Legacy, I started working for Gary. It made sense. Then I went to college, and then I got to do some really cool stuff. And so I'm going to talk about, I'm almost done with my background, and then I'm going to talk about kind of visioning out kind of the trade and some of the kind of the risks and threats and concerns I see. Mostly herps, but we study everything from coconut crabs to golden eagles. And so we've been catching golden eagles in Southern California since 2014. I knew nothing about birds. I pretty much still know nothing about birds, but I know a lot about golden eagles. Just to point out that I'm still actually breeding herps. I'm an emu rancher, so that's our first baby emu that we then raised, and now we're producing the next generation of baby emus. There's Matt holding one. And so just so that I have a little bit of street cred, I'm breeding some, herps. Sorry, there's my wife. She was there last night. She was proud of me for getting an award. Thanks you guys for the award. That was amazing. Totally unexpected. So to step on in, if you guys probably saw this on the news, it's about 1 million species going extinct in the globe over the next 50 years. This is that report. Here's some graphs from that report that was out last month. And you see amphibians, this is extinction since 1500, reptiles going extinct, amphibians going extinct. And part of the point of this is just to think about what's the relevancy of this group, and that's what Philippe brought up at the front. At the beginning, the opener, and I'll tie back to some of Philippe's challenges kind of through my talk. So we have extinctions, but then we have this concept of biological annihilation. So extinctions is when there's no last living individual of a species, not one. Biological annihilation is actually what's happening, and that's what we're more worried about, where you're actually losing populations until you have not one individual left. So we don't talk about biological annihilation as much as we talk about extinction, but it's the lead up to extinction. So by the time there's 4 individuals left of a species, it's already pretty much extinct. But when there was 300 individuals left, that's when we could have saved it. And as you lose these populations, so it's these range shrinkages is kind of leading to this massive anthropogenic erosion of biodiversity and ecosystem services. And so this is just a model that we published a while back about development impact in Southern California, and kind of showing how we're losing populations of everything from horned lizards to kind of anything else in this coastal area that's red, and then we're kind of pushing them back and they're retreating to these more green areas. And so this biological annihilation is something we want to kind of keep thinking about because it's an important concept as well as kind of extinction. And then one of the things that we just heard about from Philippe, and I want to introduce this idea, is this aesthetics of biological diversity. And so this is a great paper by Ross Keister. He's the science guy now at the Turtle Conservancy in Ojai. He's like the scientist, but he's got this idea about the Sublime that's really interesting. I'm going to introduce this because it ties nicely with the art in the art ideas that we hear from Philippe. So a herp collecting trip, he talks about how that is a biodiversity experience, and it's a prototypical biodiversity experience. And they certainly, you see these things, you have this expectation of what you might see, and then you find some stuff, sometimes you're disappointed, but it's a biodiversity experience. A price list is a biodiversity experience, and this is what's really interesting. This ties back to this trade, right? So he's talking about getting a price list from Quivera Specialties, or it could have been Crutchfield or someone else, and that's sold live amphibians, reptiles. That experience of dreaming over the list that he could order, and just thinking about those species on that list, and thinking about the way they're described on that list was a biodiversity experience. Like just the concept that there's this thing out there drove it, and that's kind of goes back to what Philippe was just talking about. There's something in us about herps that's just different. We don't think about dogs like that. I don't look at a list of dog types and say, oh wow, if I could think about chihuahuas that much. It's not the same kind of thing that it hits our head about. And actually, Gary will talk later in a small video I have, and he'll explain this as well from 20 years ago. And so then, following on in this paper, one of the main things is this, he uses this phrase, managing for the sublime, which is kind of what we do. It's that there's certainly possible to manage in such a way the possibility of a sublime experience is more likely. And so, like this lizard on the left, I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's an undescribed lizard, but I'm not actually going to tell you. So now you're going to go, well, what the hell is it? And you'll think about it. And that's creating an experience in you. I'm not going to tell you where it's from. Okay, I will. It's from the South Pacific. And it's big. But that's all I'm going to tell you. And then that gives you now a sublime experience about something you can't, that's a possibility out there that's going to happen later, if that makes sense. Because I wanted to kind of lead this up. And so it ties back to Fijian iguanas because they're forbidden. So the reason Gary's so excited about Fijian iguanas is not because he's seen one and he's held one or he's got them in his house, but it's because he can't have them. And that's why, that's what makes him crazy about it, because that's sublime to Gary. And so I tell him, give me $2 million, we'll buy an island, you can have a whole bunch of iguanas. But it's about declaring places or things forbidden to entry. And biodiversity in these areas can only be imagined through some, through time as they acquire some sublime impact. And then this example here about having peaks that are forbidden, nobody can climb on those. So the climbers are freaking out, like, I need to get to that peak, because I can't. So they're having this possibility that there's a place you can't go or an animal you can't have creates a sublime experience. So that's what's so depressing to me about like wanting airless monitors, because like it was sublime until now they're breeding them. It was a great talk, but it just like ruins it, because I want to go to Borneo and see them and experience it in a way and not go to a pet store and see them. And that's a sublime thing that changed when they're now in the trade, if that makes sense. So then the question is, what happens with extinction? Because you have species on a list, they might be extinct, but they still stay on a list. And what does that mean? And and there's this quote about the real tiger never matches the paper tiger. And some of it gets a bit philosophical, but there's this question about, okay, we know there were mammoths, and we can think about a mammoth, but is that the same experience as seeing a mammoth? And what happens with an extinction? And so I'm going to make you kind of sad in a minute about that. And then this goes back to something Philippe said as well. Funding the conditions that allow species to continue to survive, or working towards that end allows us to participate in the condition of possibility. It's a possibility you could see a mammoth if we are doing everything we can to save it. So how many people have seen a condor in the wild? Okay, so you can see a condor in the wild. How many people saw a condor in the wild before 1985, 89? There you go. So one person saw them. If we didn't invest $75 million in condors, the rest of you wouldn't have experienced it. And people that want to see a condor won't have that opportunity. That's that investment that Philippe was talking about. And that's pretty like sublime. And then Gary's point, which you'll hear later, about reptiles as art, and well, he uses a different term, is capturing something in us that Philippe just talked about again. And then this point about investing in conservation solutions. So then let's get real for a minute and talk about the sublime. So how many people know what a round island burrowing boa is? How many have seen one? Right. So it's extinct. So it's a genus of extinct boas, boidae, bolerids. There's a specimen that was collected in 1870. There's a plate from the 1800s. So we've got a few people that even know what they are. This is the last living one that was ever photographed, the only photographs of a live one. So I'm sharing something special with you guys. Nobody's ever seen this, except the guys that took it. I had to commit that I'm not selling this photo to actually get it. It's from 1975. The whole genus is extinct. There was one specimen, that one species in the genus is from Round Island, the same place we heard about Phelsuma standing eye last night. And Gunther, sorry. Guntherite, right? That's the one on. These are the only photos. So this is Sublime at some level, but it's extinct. So there's no possibility we can see this now, except in a jar, or this photo, or this photo, or this photo, or that photo. That's it. Everything else is dead in a jar. And so that experience is dead to us. It's sublime that maybe we can rediscover it, but we can't, the possibility of existing anymore is kind of past now. And so here's a picture I took in 1988 of a Guadalcanal king rat. This is one of only a couple of photos of the live ones, and that's the last live individual ever known. So the possibility, and I've got friends that have been searching for these rats, and they're gone as far as we can tell. And so that's again, it's sublime in a certain way. So I want to just kind of make this point because I think it's really important to this trade and how we think about how we deal with our, just how we think about the trade and how we think about reptiles and amphibians. So some of these sublime experiences, like I have, is we go to a place where we don't know what's there. And then went to a quick trip to Manus, working on brown tree snakes, and discovered 3 new geckos. I called this one the bumblebee gecko, because it looked like a bumblebee when I saw it on a wall in a village hut. We published it, National Geographic picked it up, the bumblebee gecko, latest buzz in Reptilum about the bumblebee gecko. Okay, so that's interesting. It was sublime to me because I saw something on a wall I couldn't identify. And in fact, nobody had ever seen that before, as far as I could tell. There was not one specimen in the collection. So that's kind of a sublime experience because I knew there was a possibility of new things in Manus Island, but to actually find new things in Manus Island is really kind of solving that sublime like discovery piece. Then, crazy, this band is now named after my gecko. This is 100% serious. They named it, they dedicated their first release after me. They're from a place called Beestown in Nottingham, England. They play clubs around that area, and they were looking for something related to bees. And so they're searching the internet, they came across the bumblebee gecko, and they named their band Nactus Canan. So that's affecting social change, right? This is the other gecko we discovered. And again, this was gliding. It's a giant Cahyra, and I actually only found one individual, and it glided between trees when I was trying to catch it, and I finally caught it. And then you can kind of see a little bit of the wings behind the legs, and it had this striking eye. Orange on top, yellow below. Knew it was new. I only had one female. Then a couple of groups came out later, picked up a couple more individuals, and then we were able to describe it. But again, this was part of that sublime experience. So maps can be sublime. So I'm going to show you this map. So this map is all of the museum records that like records for any organisms globally, okay? So these are all the museum records. There's 450 million biodiversity data points, not just herps, everything. These are transects for whales, these are everything. Okay, so that's what's known. So what you see there, those areas, the northern Africa, that's sublime. We don't know what's there. We can make guesses, it's a lot of sand, but we don't actually have any information about what's there. That's real information from biodiversity data. So to me, again, that meets that sublime. There's parts of South America that are like that. Southern California, it looks like we know a lot, but I can tell you we don't know as much as we think we do. And this is just, so it's really interesting when you look at this, and you blow up Indonesia, and you look at Malaysia next to Sumatra. We know a ton for Malaysia, and if anybody follows what Lee Grismer does, they are still publishing a ton of new species. You look at Sumatra, we have almost no information for Sumatra. If you want to discover new species, go to Sumatra. That, to me, is like a big win. And it's sublime because you're going to discover a lot of new stuff. This is just a sublime experience you can have at home. And this goes back to herpetoculture. So this is a Timor monitor that was found underneath a board near Kalzu. It was a little hatchling. And the guy who found it thought it was a Nile monitor, gave it to me. And so now it's grown up. But it lives in a complex cage like we just heard about from Philippe. And it will not come out if people are around. So to actually see it, you have to be cryptic and stealthy to actually see it. So that's a sublime experience with an animal sitting in my house, which is different than the fly river turtle, which is just following you constantly, wanting food. And so you can actually have that without actually seeing that monitor. I know it exists. The possibility of seeing it exists. It's in that cage. But to see it, I have to trick it. So then back to herpetoculture. So I don't know how much time I have, another hour? I assume. We got a lot to talk about. So anyway, issues of social responsibility. So what I just did was I just did a real quick, like, these are the pieces of herpetoculture, right? You have wild source. I'll talk about Fiji. Distribution, how you get the wild source to a site to breed or whatever that destination is, and I'll talk about that. And then a destination place, another, how do you get it to where it's available? And then, then you can have now a captive source where you don't have any wild source, but now you might have wild releases. And so there's kind of this like supply chain, let's call it, or whatever. And I'm going to talk about kind of a couple pieces of it. But one thing I wanted to review is some of the literature on the global trade in reptiles. So there's a big literature on it that's coming out. And if you need any of these papers, Justin's here, right? Justin? Yeah, Justin will email you any of these papers. Just ask him. He offered that up yesterday, I swear. So these are really important to think about, and think about these shifting trends in production and sustainability when we talk later about future trends. And we've heard about there's no more of this left in the country. There's no more of this left in the country. There's a lot of literature that's very interesting to look at. Now these are just 10 CITES reptile species and their trends over time. So there's a good series of literature to think about as we think about the trade. This one's great. This is a world map of exports and percentages. And like some of them, like Colombia, 90% were iguana. 14% of total exports are from there. And so you can get a sense of where the hotspots of exports are. Most of us know this, we don't need a map, but it helps you think about it. And then we can think about who's importing them, who are the users of these products. And then it goes both ways, right? Because some of these places become exporters as well. Like the United States is maybe exporting stuff that was not from here. And so we're exporters and importers. Anyway, I just wanted to point these out because I think they're really important to think about. And then there's this whole one on wildlife farming and how does it benefit conservation? When can it benefit? And they have a simple model that shows if these are the criteria for wildlife farming, and if you follow these criteria, then farming can be beneficial. If these criteria can't be met, then farming is not recommended or is not beneficial possibly, and is not adding to conservation. What's happened recently is we have this huge issue with publishing locality data. And that's why I had to pull locality data out of some of my slides, if I have time to get to them. And so there's a whole narrative about this right now, and about not publishing locality data. And there's people that say, actually, do not publish, because they're worried. And we heard about this on a couple days ago from Philippe about the Union gecko. There was a big write-up in the National Geographic about it. I can't speak to that. Haven't seen the data on whether it's being wiped out or not. I can talk specifically about Fiji and what I know about Fiji, but this is in the literature. This is the discussion. So when we look at that map of gaps, some of those gaps are not going to be filled because people are going to be concerned about putting dots on those maps of biodiversity dots, because they're concerned that you're just creating a recipe book of where to find rare things. And then these are how you assess risk to whether or not you should publish locality data. There's other people that say publish openly and responsibly, and that there are ways to publish the data, but to hide the specifics and just release them. But it's like we don't live forever, so who is going to be in charge of releasing those data in the future? There's this big one that I think is really an important review that came out on the trade of live reptiles and the role of the European market. So this one's a good one to look at, and it's got some specific things I want to point out. So there's more than 10,000 reptile species. Fewer than 8% are regulated. So there's a lot that are unregulated. And then they talk about how many are threatened, how many are intentionally targeted by collectors, and how many are non-CITES targeted by collectors. And so this piece here about the role of Uganda in the trade is really interesting. So in 2014, CITES Management Authority issued export permits to Uganda for these animals. These are for Galapagos iguanas. And for all practice purposes, laundering these animals into the pet trade and opening the door for additional smuggling efforts. That's the prediction And then 2015, we had a Mexican citizen smuggling iguanas into Uganda, attempting to. So this role in Uganda ties back to me and my experiences in Fiji, and I'll get to that in a few. This is a ticking time bomb. So this is now going back to social responsibility. These are corn snake records for Sydney, Australia. And there's no legal pet trade for corn snakes in Australia, but they're becoming, potentially erupting as a problem in Australia. And these are captive snakes by keepers, or by hobbyists. And so this is where we have to have clear statements about what to do with unwanted pets and how to deal with this issue, because we don't want to drive Australian species extinct with North American corn snakes. And then this story ties back to what Philippe said about working with small geckos and skinks. He specifically said skinks. There's only a few species that are extinct in the wild but persist in captivity. There's 3 reptiles, 2 amphibians. 2 of the reptiles are from Christmas Island. One is this Lister's gecko, the other is blue-tailed skink. And the one is a turtle, a giant softshell. And so these are species we need to solve. We need to solve how you breed these. There was a 3rd species called the forest skink, and it's extinct now. The last individual known went extinct. There were 4, it says 3 here, but there were 4, and they had no idea how to breed them, and they couldn't even put them together because they would fight. And because nobody actually worked on species like that. And so that species went extinct without a possibility of saving it, whereas the geckos and the blue-tailed skinks were actually saved. So these are the 2. Again, they're not fancy things. They're small. You could have piles of them in an aquarium. But solving how we do reproduction in these actually saves species, or in surrogates for these. And then these are the trends over time of the populations in these captive populations. There's one on the island and then one at Taronga Zoo. And then it talks about the substantial investment. So is $200,000 a lot of money to save 2 species? You know, or $500,000 to save 2 species? Like what is the species worth? And that's kind of an important thing to wrap your head around. We know how much condors are worth, at least 75 million. Okay, so this is a paper we just published on albino king snakes in the Canary Islands. And so these guys are taking over the Canaries, and I don't know how many people know this story, but it's a friggin' mess. And there's an albino king snake. There's Bob Reed. If you guys want to get angry at somebody about giant pythons, that's Bob, not me. Anyway, but Bob and I and another guy, Brian Hines, went to the Canaries as part of a colloquium to try to think about their king snake problem. And there's what the habitat looks like. And it's just basically rocks, and the king snakes are in the rocks, but they're eating the native fauna. And so since '97, they've been slowly erupting. And this is one I caught just walking down the street, a baby striped albino. And then there's all the different morphs there. And then this is what we just published. We're showing that the snakes in the Canaries are 35% heavier than the snakes in North America from wild-caught animals. So they're just, and mostly it's the females, they're just big old fatties. They're not that much longer, but they're just fat. And they produce a ton more eggs, and they produce eggs more often. So we had, I think, 50%, I don't know if it shows here, but of the females there were gravid. And so these are just some graphs. I don't have a lot of time to talk about it. But they also, in the Canaries, they breed earlier than they breed in California. So we're looking at these differences. This is Grand Canary. Canary right there. There's West Africa. West Africa. It's off of Morocco. And then those are the Canaries. They're now showing up on Tenerife and Lanzarote. So pretty soon, there's this highly endemic herpetofauna and avifauna of the Canaries that might go to 0 soon because of these trade-related releases that, again, we need to have a clear statement about, and that's what Philippe suggested earlier. And I think these are serious things we need to think about when we talk about risk of different species in the trade and risk of different species in different places globally. The big issue is the endemics. That's a Galodia. Those are those giant, awesome lacertids that are herbivorous. And this one is endemic to this one island, Stineli. There's no offshore islands where it can persist on, and it's going extinct because of the king snakes. And then this is what the king snakes eat. So I'm going to step away from this for a sec. That's Galodia. That's the big skink. I mean the big lacerta. Those are the endemic skinks. And that's the endemic gecko, and other small mammals. So it's eating the 3 endemic reptiles and then invasive rodents. But those Galodia that it's eating are all of the young Galodia. And so if you look at it can't eat these big ones. There's bigger ones than this, but they can't eat them, but they're eating all of the recruitment. And so this is body size change in two different populations. One population, you can see how much smaller they are because they're averaging across all individuals. The other population is only giant adults as it's spreading. One is with them and one is without them. With king snakes and one is without king snakes. There's this website here that was about the project, and then they update these maps. And this is the map from 2019 already. There was like 300 or 400 snakes already caught this year. They've removed 4,000 or 5,000 snakes already. And you can see now they've got enclaves of populations almost all around the island. And when we did the distribution modeling for the species, for the Cal King on Gran Canaria, the best habitat is on top of the mountain. Not even where they were, but on top of the mountain is the better habitat. That's in one of these giant Galodia. It's not just a problem here. Here's Cabrillo. We did a BioBlitz at Cabrillo National Monument just right here. We got a hybrid king snake, Florida King, Cal King cross. Somebody's dumping pets, and we picked up a snake that's really weird. We did the genetics. It's a hybrid cross. So even here, we're getting now hybridization here in king snakes as an issue. Fiji iguanas. If I have time, otherwise I'll just toss out the Fiji part. All right. So this is my favorite individual iguana. It's awesome. So I'm going to talk about Fijian iguanas. Fiji is there for scope. The iguanas originated in Southwest North America. They've been split for about 40 million years in Fiji. Their closest relative, if you had to say a relative, would be the desert iguanas. They're basal, like desert iguanas are, to the rest of the Iguanidae. So we've been working with the Survivor Entertainment Group, SCG, for now 4 years, 8 seasons. We're just finishing the most recent season. This is the first one we did work with them, and we do both biosecurity, so that they're not moving anything between islands. That's the iguana, right? Let me see. And so this is that iguana and the thing. That was when they were filming it. I was holding the tail in that first bit. They've been an excellent partner. They provide security on one of our, this island here, Monteriki. They provide security there for over 6 months a year, making sure nobody's smuggling iguanas off. We know people are smuggling iguanas off because we're doing this research project there, and we've got pictures of people taking iguanas we've captive raised, put out, and then we can see them holding them in their Facebook posts after 6 months later when they're back in Czechoslovakia. And so that's a big issue. This whole wildlife trafficking is a big issue in a really small place where there's limited numbers of individuals. And so partnering with them has been super helpful. This is the tribal council. If anybody saw the most recent season, this was the tribal council for that one. Real quickly, discovery of Fijian iguanas. One species in 1800, then another one in 1981. Then I described one with some friends in 2008. Then I described another one in 2017. I've got at least another 6 more species, and there's got to be at least another 10 that went extinct that we have no opportunity to describe because we don't have enough material. The Fijian iguana was the 360th species of reptile described and the 4th species of Iguanidae. I mean, that's how long we've known this thing, and yet we know nothing about the diversity in this genus until recently. And then these are some specimens. That's a drawing from 1862, and that's the real specimen. And look how good they preserve stuff in like fine whiskey or whatever they used back then. The spirits are so much better than we have now because anything recent doesn't have those colors. There's 2 fossil species, one from Tonga that's extinct, it's fossil, and then a really giant one from Fiji that's also extinct. And they were eaten by the first arrivals in both those places, by the Tongans when they first arrived, and then by the Fijians pretty quickly. So when I graduated high school, I went to Fiji to go see Fijian iguanas. So I took the money I earned working for Gary for 3 years, and I went and did a Pacific Island trip. And at 17, here's John Gibbons, who passed away 2 years later in a boating accident studying iguanas in Fiji. And this was actually that iguana there. This is a Monteriki iguana from that island. When I say that iguana, I mean that island. And he showed me the diversity that was there he was still working on describing. And then he prematurely died with his wife and his 2 kids in a boating accident. Boating is super dangerous and I hate it. And then there's 4 living species. So Vidiensis was the one he described in 81. I described this one in 2008, Bula Bula. And then we described the now iguana in 2017. And that's the holotype kind of plate there on the left. And I'm going to step through a series of different iguanas that we're working on describing, but we can only describe them when we can ensure that they can be protected in situ. And that's a big struggle because there's not enough resources to do that very well. So here's what we had as existing knowledge is from our paper in 2008. This map of where iguanas are, people have used this map to actually go to those places. I know this. And then we looked at maps of where iguanas were historically, and then we went and surveyed iguanas. Came up with a whole bunch of morphological characters, and then I've caught maybe more than 300 iguanas from probably close to 30 islands in Fiji, and measuring them all. And I do it all myself just because that way because I love Fiji. But I mean, you saw the video. But because it's more standardized in how we score some of these characters, but you see this difference in these crests across some of these different ones and the throat patterns. I have blanked out all the names of sites that aren't known yet because it's being videotaped. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't want to do that, but I think it's important that I do. So where we can show morphologically that these things are discriminating. That's the largest species there. It's 255 millimeters, and then that's the smallest one we discovered, which is the size of a desert iguana about. So we've discovered this big range in body size of undescribed species still. We looked at maps, identified where forest patches were, and there's a patch, and that's the entire patch for a forest on this island is for the best patch for iguanas. And so we surveyed those sites. Here's just a quick map showing where we found iguanas, where we haven't, and a lot of extinctions that have taken place. I had to get rid of all the names. So we're doing microsats, and there's big differences across islands. I had to get rid of the whole mitochondrial tree because it had all the names in it, and I couldn't figure out how to block them out real quick. So we do have genetics in addition to the morphology to support different species. I'm going to just run through some of the different species we discovered. This is one blank island iguana, and this one, the females are this kind of more mottled. There's another term I was using, piebald kind of, and then the males have the blotching. And then this has got these females show this cephalic bilateral asymmetry, which is a super, super rare thing in lizards. So where the one side of the face looks different than the other side of the face. And so you can draw a line down the middle of the head. Oh, that picture's not there, the middle head. Well, you can see this is the same individual. That's the right side of the face with the green mottling, and then the left side of the face where it's unicolor. And there's a kind of, you can see the split right down the middle of the head. So this has only just been described once in lizards before, and it's in this anole from Aruba, where they're talking about how much more coloration it has on the right side of the dewlap versus the left side, which it's whatever. But it's that's the only documented example. I think the iguanas are much more, and it's only in the females that we've seen. This is another undescribed one we've got. And I've tried to put kind of population sizes, so we estimate there's maybe 200 total of this individual. This is one that Gibbons showed me in '84 when I was there, and then basically we thought it was extinct. There's almost no habitat left on the island, and then we're actually doing a captive and in situ breeding program with this iguana on the island it occurs on, and it's spectacular. This iguana is that larger one. And the eggs are twice the size of the other crested iguana, the described one from Yandutamba. And then this one is the one I need Gary to buy the island. I need $2 million. We can buy this island. And there's at least 100 iguanas on it, and they only occur on this one island. And they're also in Uganda, unfortunately. And so, yeah, and now there may be some in Germany. So we can toss out the concern that wildlife trafficking is not really a problem, but it is really a problem for some of our species because the numbers are so small. And taking them to Germany isn't going to save them in the wild. Getting that island secured and not getting a resort on it is going to save them in the wild. This is one of the dwarf ones, so there's a male and a female. Oh, I didn't put the other photo in. We got one population that has banded female banded iguanas, which is another weird species we figured out. And then this is the mini one. This is a 135 millimeter one. And then another unique one. And then this one, we're still trying to get enough individuals to do morphology. And then these are the next steps for the iguana work. We have a bunch of new species. We're trying to, if you want to invest in conservation in Fiji, the San Diego Zoo has an iguana fund or go to the ISG, the Iguana Specialist Group. There's ways to help fund the Fiji work. We have a big issue with invasive green iguanas. A guy brought him from Los Angeles. He lives in Newport Beach. We know exactly where he lives. I can give you an address. And he brought them there because he owned a parcel of land. And he brought them and sulcata tortoises. The iguanas now, Fiji's finally got $3 million to try to fight them. And they're now on 3 or 4 islands. And they're going to be a big food security issue because nobody in Fiji, most people live on their plantation, and they can't fence out these things. I talked about wildlife smuggling. There's 2 guys there you might recognize. The one is named Thomas Benjamin Price in the center, and then Gustavo is on the right. He's the guy that was bringing in iguanas recently. Read this book. It's some parts are painful, but it's really I think an important way to, like, a lot of the stuff in here is really true, and it's a good way to kind of think about some of this stuff. And I know some of it's true kind of firsthand. But one of these guys, so let's say the middle one, is highlighted in this book quite a bit. These are the Galapagos iguanas, the marine iguanas that were confiscated in 2015 that Gustavo had, that he was on his way to Uganda with. He's serving 2 years. I guess he should be out by now. So he could show up anywhere now. Yeah. And so, so when I say I know firsthand, there's Price. He came to a meeting we hosted in Fiji. So I've interacted with him. Here's his page on ResearchGate, and these are the people he follows, me and Pete Harlow. We had to stop putting anything on social media about iguanas in Fiji. We had to slow down publishing. Like the do not publish thing kind of is what we're doing right now on some of the stuff, which is a real big bummer. And Thomas has this conservation center in Uganda. You know, these are correspondence between, you know, Thomas sending me emails asking me specific questions about things. Like, you say, okay, he's a nice guy, you know, I met him, we talked, but this is kind of the people he hangs out with. So here's Thomas and his friends, 2016 at the conference that they were not invited to. This guy on the right, Jean-Pierre, he's the yacht guy that they were moving around Fiji with. This is him a week and a half after the conference. He got stabbed. Somebody tried killing him with a screwdriver. Like, I don't want to hang out with people whose buddies get attacked for that because maybe they're transporting more than just wildlife. This is recent. This is from last year. This is a crested iguana from Yondu-Atamba. I know exactly who did this. Our guys out there interacted with them. The same guys somebody in the room interacted with. They interacted with these guys, got them off the island, got the iguanas out of their bags, and then they came back and took iguanas to Spain. There's dead iguanas right there from Yondu-Atamba. They don't need to be dead in Spain. This is all stuff from that same thing. This is just now, like 2 months ago, this cruise ship had live iguanas on it. Somebody's bringing it back to Australia. And then this is from this week. I just found this morning. It was Operation Blizzard. I didn't even know this had happened. So there's 180 suspects, it said, here that they're going after. So, like, it may not be, like, there may be some rules that don't really make sense in some places, but in some places those rules make a lot of sense. And we can talk about that more later. But it's consistent with what Philippe said. We need to have clear policy white papers to discriminate this trade from the highly illicit one. And kind of, I just want to be clear about that because I think that's really important. And he said that on the first day. Okay, that's all I had except for one more thing. I want to do another shout out to Philippe. So, and I forgot to do this when we were doing the Sublime. There's this picture in this book, which Philippe, like one of the things that was super sublime to me was the largest skink in the South Pacific, which had been thought to be extinct, Phobos skincus bocordi, for over 150 years. Philippe found the first living specimen, and there's a picture of it right there, when he was in New Caledonia. And they misidentified it as Gardneri because everybody said bocordi was extinct. And then later, Yvonne Einisch rediscovered it on that same island after Philippe had, and then kind of published on that. But Philippe was the first guy to rediscover a species that had been lost for like 150 years. That's awesome story, because it was a rediscovery of a giant lizard that we thought was extinct, and I hope maybe that could happen with those burrowing boas, but I don't think it will. And I just want to end with this, that we're later going to talk about these white papers we need, and how do we discriminate legitimate from illegitimate trade practices, and that includes going back to those do not release signs that Kalamazoo had, like they talked about earlier. Like every pet shop should have those, and we should have places to, just the same way fire stations have a place to put a baby. Like there's one right near my house. It's like, drop your baby here. If you don't want your baby, you can drop it at the fire station. We need to have that for reptiles so they don't end up in a place where they don't belong. So I'll end with that. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Robert, for taking the time and making that great presentation. I know it wasn't necessarily your first idea to be on video, but I think a lot of us out here appreciate you doing it anyway. And next week, we've got the very last Herpeton talk with Mr. Philippe de Vaugelas, one of the two men who started Herpeton with Alan Rapace. And then there's going to be some big changes coming to Triple B TV. Some really exciting stuff. If you paid attention to the mutation creation live stream I was on last week or earlier this week, the day before yesterday, then you heard a little bit about it. But I'm excited to bring it to you guys and keep Triple B TV going in the direction that I think it's been headed for the past however many years. And but until Philippe next week, you've been watching Triple B TV. Y'all take care.